This was a horrific crime, but I'm going to impose the maximum sentence just because you deserve it, to serve the rest of your life in prison.
When we talk about gang violence, there are the feared brains and figures who command the respect of their ruthless crews. These guys bear ink-marked skin. Their tattoos are a symbol of their fierce defiance and the unyielding terror they command. But today, these dangerous individuals will come face to face with the unforgiving hands of justice.
I'm gonna be brutally honest. I'm not saying I regret it, because what I know for a fact, if I could have changed some things, I wouldn't be here where I am now.
Watch as their defiant facades crumble, as we reveal the raw, unfiltered reactions when they are sentenced to spend the rest of their lives behind bars. These are dangerous gang leaders reacting to life sentences. Gerald Thomas. The streets of Cape Town, South Africa were a battleground for the notorious 28 gang, led by the ruthless Gerald Thomas. With a trail of 52 charges, including 7 murders, 3 attempted murders, racketeering, and a litany of other violent offenses, Thomas was the embodiment of the gang's reign of terror. In 2008, Thomas and 2 of his fellow 28 gang members were arrested after a shooting incident in the Bishop Lavis neighborhood. Thomas was found in possession of a rifle fitted with a telescopic sight and silencer, while his accomplice had a box of ammunition to accompany the weapon. This was just the tip of the iceberg when it came to the gang's bloody exploits. The 28 were locked in a brutal gang war with their rivals, the 26 gang, known as the Clever Kids. Tragically, innocent lives were lost in the crossfire, including Marvin Esther Heisen, the brother of gangster Curtis Azer Heisen, who was mistakenly killed in a shooting on November 23, 2008. Yet Thomas's crimes were not just confined to the streets. His behavior in the courtroom was equally shocking. During the trial at the High Court in Cape Town, he put on a disturbing display, laughing, making gang signs, and treating the entire proceedings as a joke. But the 28 gang was not about to let their leader go down without a fight. They orchestrated a relentless campaign of intimidation, with 12 state witnesses murdered and 27 more attempted murders over the 4-year trial period. The message was clear. If I talk, I will get shot, as one witness explained. Despite the 28's best efforts, the weight of the evidence against Thomas was overwhelming. He was ultimately sentenced to a staggering 175 years in prison. Yet, even as the sentence was delivered, Thomas showed no remorse, defiantly saying that he's not regretting it because his whole life is the person that he is today. John Gotti. In the annals of American organized crime, few figures loom as large as John Gotti, the flamboyant, media-savvy boss of the Gambino crime family, who captivated the public's imagination throughout the 1980s. Born into a life of poverty in New York City, Gotti and his brothers quickly turned to a life of crime, with Gotti rapidly ascending the ranks of the Gambino family under the tutelage of underboss Agnello Della Croce. Gotti's criminal exploits were not limited to traditional mafia practices. Facing an FBI indictment for drug trafficking, he orchestrated the brazen murder of then-boss Paul Castellano, seizing control of the Gambino family and cementing his reputation as one of the most powerful and dangerous crime bosses in the United States. Known for his lavish tastes, outspoken personality, and impeccable sense of style, Gotti cultivated an image as the Dapper Don, a larger-than-life figure who seemed to captivate the public's imagination. Despite facing multiple trials in the 1980s, Gotti seemed untouchable, earning the moniker Teflon Don after being acquitted each time. This was largely due to the meticulous efforts of his right-hand man, Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano, who systematically intimidated and tampered with witnesses and jurors, ensuring Gotti's continued freedom. However, Gotti's reign of terror would ultimately come to a tragic end. In a stunning betrayal, Gravano would later confess to the grisly details of their criminal partnership, including their involvement in numerous murders. This shocking act of betrayal unraveled Gotti's criminal empire and led to his downfall. In 1992, Gotti was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a fate sealed by the very man he had trusted most, Kenneth Hill. In the heart of Michigan, an unimaginable tale of violence and tragedy unfolded as a trio of hardened gangsters found themselves on trial for the brutal murder of a beloved local business owner. The players in this grim drama were Kenneth Hill, Jamal Robinson, and Darius Diaz-Gasson, all facing a litany of charges, including the most heinous of all, murder. The fateful events unfolded on March 28, 2014, at the Moonlight Party store, where the owner, Basim Sulaka, a man known for his kindness and generosity towards his customers and employees, found himself in the crosshairs of these ruthless individuals. The attack lasted a mere 1 minute and 44 seconds, but the impact it left on the community would be felt for years to come. Surveillance footage from the store painted a chilling picture. Diaz-Gasson, Robinson, and another individual, Clinton Grayson, entered the store, and within 20 seconds, Sulaka was shot in the back with Diaz-Gasson's own handgun. The peaceful man, who did not even keep a gun in his store, was now lying lifeless on the floor, a victim of a senseless act of violence. The trial that followed was a heart-wrenching affair, as Sulaka's family, particularly his sister, Vivian, had the opportunity to address the men who had taken her brother's life. Her words were a testament to the depth of her pain and the outrage she felt towards them. She expressed her hope that, while they spent the rest of their lives in prison, they would finally reflect on the awful decisions that led them down this path. But just when it seemed the family had found a moment of solace, the unthinkable happened. Jamal Robinson, in a chilling display of callousness, hinted that Vivian was next, uttering the ominous words, "This ain't over yet." The judge, Mary Janowski, was appalled, demanding an explanation for such a heinous threat against the grieving family. After 2 days of deliberations, the jury delivered its verdict. The 3 men were found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Though the punishment was severe, it could never undo the immeasurable loss and trauma inflicted upon the Sulaka family. Lee Rios. In the summer of 2015, the quiet streets of Massachusetts were shaken by a brutal act of violence that would leave an indelible mark on the community. At the center of this tragedy stood Lee Rios, a member of the notorious Latin King Street gang, who found himself embroiled in a shocking murder case. Rios and his fellow gang member, Jonathan Guada, had their sights set on Kenneth Lopez, a young man whose only crime was crossing paths with the wrong individuals. The motive for this heinous act was driven by a twisted sense of ego and disrespect. Rios believed that Lopez had the audacity to hit on his ex-girlfriend, and he simply couldn't tolerate the perceived slight to his reputation. The chilling details of the crime unfolded like a tragic drama. Rios lured Lopez out of his home, and the two shared a cab to the fateful location where the deed would be done. Waiting for them were 3 other Latin King gang members, creating a deadly ambush. In a horrifying display of ruthlessness, Rios discharged 5 shots, 4 of which found their mark on Lopez, including 2 to the head. As the case unfolded in the courtroom, Rios maintained a cold and aloof demeanor, seemingly unaffected by the gravity of his actions. He defiantly denied the charges, but the evidence was overwhelming, and a jury ultimately convicted him of first-degree murder. The judge's words were a somber affirmation of the finality of Rios's fate, sentencing him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Victor Rodas. The quiet town of Bedford County, Virginia, has a harrowing tale of violence and retribution unfolded as the shockwaves of a brutal murder reverberated through the community. At the center of this story stood Victor Rodas, a member of the notorious MS-13 gang, who found himself facing charges for a crime that would chill the hearts of all who heard it. Rodas, a known associate of the victim, 17-year-old Raymond Wood, lured the young man from his home under the pretense of a drug deal involving marijuana. But this was no ordinary transaction. It was a deadly trap that would ultimately seal Wood's fate. According to the prosecution, Rodas and his fellow gang members ruthlessly abducted Wood, driving him to a remote location in Bedford County. There, they used a knife to cut Wood's throat, sever his right hand, and stab him 27 times in the chest and stomach. The savagery of the attack left no doubt that this was an act of calculated, premeditated violence. In the courtroom, the defense attempted to paint a different narrative, claiming that Rodas was merely a bystander, afraid of another alleged gang member, Corus Ventura, who had supposedly ordered him to drive the car that fateful night. However, the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming, and the jury ultimately saw through this attempt to shift the blame. As the trial unfolded, the details of the exchange of threats between Rodas and Wood in the days leading up to the murder were brought to light. The prosecution argued that this was a clear case of ego, disrespect, and the twisted code of the gang lifestyle, a deadly combination that would ultimately cost an innocent life. When the verdict was delivered, Rodas was one of the 5 MS-13 gang members charged with first-degree murder. The judge handed him a sentence of 55 years in prison, and as he sat there, his face betraying no emotion, it became clear that the gangster's life had claimed another victim, this time the perpetrator himself. Young Thug. In the gritty underbelly of Atlanta, Georgia, a storm was brewing, and at its epicenter stood a towering figure in the world of hip-hop, Young Thug. With a career that had spanned over a decade, this charismatic rapper had amassed a loyal following, his name synonymous with the cutting edge of the genre. But on May 9, 2002, the spotlight shifted from his musical prowess to the dark shadows of his alleged involvement in a sprawling criminal enterprise. Young Thug, along with 27 other members and associates of his record label, YSL Records, found themselves at the center of a 56-count indictment, facing a litany of charges that ran the gamut from murder and attempted murder to robbery, assault, and witness intimidation. The prosecutors wasted no time in drawing a direct connection between Young Thug's lyrical content and the alleged racketeering activities of his organization. Songs like Anybody and tracks from the album Slime Language 2 were cited as evidence, with the indictment pointing to lines like, "I never killed anybody, but I got something to do with that body," as damning proof of the rapper's involvement in the criminal underworld. The prosecution painted YSL as a veritable criminal street gang, leaving no room for ambiguity. The shockwaves of this revelation reverberated through the music industry and the criminal justice system alike. Young Thug now found himself facing the very real possibility of spending up to 25 years behind bars, his legacy tarnished by the weight of these allegations. As the legal proceedings unfolded, the battle lines were drawn, with Young Thug's defense team fighting tooth and nail to extricate their client from the web of criminality that had ensnared him. The stakes were high, not just for the rapper himself, but for the entire genre of hip-hop, which had long grappled with the stigma of its association with gang violence and illicit activities. Jeremy Joseph Christian. Jeremy Joseph Christian is a man who was involved in a terrible hate crime that took place in Portland, Oregon, back in May 2017. It all happened on a commuter train, where Christian committed a horrifying act. He attacked 3 men, stabbing them with a knife. Tragically, 2 of the men died from their injuries, while the third was fortunate enough to survive. The incident unfolded when Christian began spewing racist and hateful remarks directed at 2 teenage girls on the train. One of the girls was African American, and the other was a Muslim who wore a hijab. The victims, brave and compassionate individuals, stood up to defend the girls from Christian's vile words. Christian's actions were driven by his extreme beliefs and deep-rooted racism. It wasn't the first time he had displayed such behavior, as witnesses had previously heard him shouting racist slurs and making derogatory comments. His words were filled with venom and intolerance. Law enforcement swiftly apprehended Christian after the attack. He faced several charges, including aggravated murder and attempted murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming, with witnesses providing accounts of his hateful outbursts. During his arrest, Christian didn't show any remorse for what he had done. In fact, he made disturbing statements, proudly admitting to the violence he had inflicted. It was a chilling confirmation of the hate that fueled his actions. The case sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. People were outraged by the senseless loss of life and the blatant display of bigotry. The incident served as a stark reminder that hate crimes persist in our society and that we must actively work to combat them. In June 2019, Christian faced trial and was found guilty on all charges. The court recognized the severity of his crimes and the pain he had caused to the victims' families. In February 2020, he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The judge emphasized the need for justice and condemned Christian's actions in the strongest terms. The story of Jeremy Christian is a tragic one, reminding us of the devastating consequences of hate and extremism. Abel Gago. In the dark and twisted underbelly of Colorado, a trio of hardened gang members found themselves facing the ultimate reckoning for their heinous crimes. Abel Gago, Rene Rosales, and Alonzo Quintana, all members of the notorious Gagos gang, stood trial for the brutal murder of 28-year-old Simone Duran, a woman whose only mistake was to cross paths with these ruthless individuals. The story unfolded with a chilling precision, a testament to the meticulous work of the investigators. Duran, it seemed, had found herself in the crosshairs of the Gagos gang after she had the misfortune of identifying Quintana in a lineup during an earlier attempted murder investigation. This act of civic responsibility would seal her tragic fate. The three gang members, driven by a twisted sense of loyalty and a complete disregard for human life, orchestrated a plan to lure Duran to a secluded location. Gallegos made initial contact with the unsuspecting victim through social media, arranging a meeting at a residence in Denver. There, Rosales and others joined them, and Duran, unaware of the impending doom, left with Gallegos. The horror that followed was almost too gruesome to recount. Gallegos took Duran to a parking lot, where Quintana joined them. The two men then assaulted the young woman before stuffing her into the back seat of a vehicle and driving her to a remote area in Golden, Colorado. It was there, in the shadows of the night, that they callously shot Duran 10 times, leaving her lifeless body behind. But the trio's depravity did not end there. Gallegos and Rosales later returned to the scene, dousing Duran's remains in gasoline before setting them ablaze, in a final act of callous disregard for their victims' humanity. As the trial progressed, the courtroom was gripped by the sheer horror of the crimes. Judge Philip McLaughlin, in passing down the sentences, expressed his profound dismay at the nonchalant nature of the murder, the complete lack of remorse displayed by the defendants, and the utter disregard for human life that had driven their actions. Gallegos, the ringleader, was sentenced to life in prison, plus an additional 163 years. He was just one of the dangerous gang leaders reacting to life sentences. Rosales received a staggering 150-year sentence, while Quintana was handed a life sentence plus 160 years. The punishment, though severe, could never undo the immeasurable pain and suffering inflicted upon Simone Duran's loved ones. Subscribers pick. This picture is filled with so much sensation. The first photo shows this infamous gang leader masked in black inscriptions sitting in the courtroom, raising his middle finger almost casually as the judge sentences him. The guy just doesn't seem to care at all about the punishment he's facing. But the second photo tells a different story. It captures the same gang boss later, as he's shouting angrily and losing his cool. Looks like he didn't take the sentence as well as he tried to act in front of the judge. This guy is used to calling the shots and getting away with his criminal activities. But it seems the court proceedings finally got to him, and he just couldn't keep up that defiant, uncaring attitude he tried to project. He let out his full color and rage just like the gangster he is. But not only him, there are other dangerous gang leaders reacting to life sentences. Shawn Denzel. In the gripping tale of Shawn Denzel Garant, we witness the dark underbelly of gang violence, where the lines between loyalty and betrayal are blurred, and the consequences of such actions are as devastating as they are unforgiving. Garant, known on the streets as Dank Dank and the leader of the Rowan 30s Crips gang, found himself facing a laundry list of charges, including conspiracy to commit murder in aid of racketeering and the murder of 17-year-old Nicholas Lee in 2017. As the gang's leader, Garant actively recruited new members, expanding the reach of his criminal enterprise, which included drug distribution, acts of violence, and firearms trafficking. But it was the murder of Lee that would ultimately bring Garant's reign of terror to an end. According to sources, Garant had ordered Lee, a new recruit, to kill another gang member, Desmond, for perceived disloyalty. However, Lee failed to carry out the order, and Garant saw this as a sign of betrayal. In a chilling display of ruthlessness, Garant then ordered the co-defendants, Trayvon Rayron, Casey Chanty, Dion Levesey, and Damon Rashad Mack, to kill Lee. The early hours of June 15, 2017, witnessed the tragic unfolding of this malicious plan. Lee was ordered to hand over his gun to Mack, and when he refused, Mack pointed his own firearm at Lee and demanded he give it up. Lee, in a desperate attempt to escape, ran, but he was chased down and ultimately shot twice in the back, killed by the very gang he had hoped to be a part of. When Garant faced the court, he showed no remorse for his actions, ultimately pleading guilty to the charges he was facing. The judge sentenced him to 37 years in prison, a punishment that Garant was clearly unhappy with. But this was not the first time that gang members had refused to accept the consequences of their crimes. Antonio Davenport. On August 18, 2019, in Greensboro, North Carolina, a tragic incident unfolded that shattered the lives of an innocent family. Antonio Davenport, also known as Lil Tony, and Derek Lamont Dixon Jr., also known as Smack, were members of the notorious 8 Trey Gangster Bloods gang. They were facing charges for murder, as they had engaged in a violent retaliation against a rival gang. The chain of events began when Davenport was assaulted at a mall in Durham. Seeking revenge, he conspired with Dixon and another gang member, Deval Paco Magwood, to target their perceived rivals. On the fateful day, the 3 men drove to an area frequented by rival gang members, intent on retaliating. However, the car they targeted did not belong to their rivals. Instead, it was carrying 9-year-old Zion Person, his aunt, and 2 other young cousins. Davenport and Dixon opened fire, fatally shooting Zion in the head. Zion's 8-year-old cousin was also shot in the forearm, but survived the attack. The evidence against Davenport and Dixon was overwhelming. Davenport's ankle monitor and surveillance footage placed him at the scene of the crime, and a 9mm handgun linked to the murder was found in his girlfriend's car. Dixon later pled guilty to conspiracy and murder charges in federal court, and both men were sentenced to life imprisonment. Tragically, the gangsters showed no remorse for their actions, denying their involvement even in the face of the damning evidence. Their loyalty to the gang appeared to outweigh any concern for the innocent lives they had taken. The senseless murder of young Zion Person serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of gang violence and the disregard for human life that can lurk within criminal organizations. El Chapo. How fatal can the fall of a mighty be? Well, the story of this man paints a very clear picture. El Chapo once held the power of life and death in his hands. Responsible for over 1,000 deaths, he now finds tears streaming down his face as the reality sinks in. He will spend the rest of his days locked away in a United States prison. El Chapo, Mexico's answer to Pablo Escobar, was not just a drug lord, but the mastermind behind the most sophisticated drug cartel in the country, the infamous Sinaloa cartel. Let's rewind to El Chapo's early days. Born in abject poverty on April 4, 1957, he endured a turbulent childhood. His father, a cattle rancher by day and a drug dealer by night, subjected him to abuse. In a twist of irony, El Chapo's father involved him in the marijuana trade, only to squander the profits on everything except his family. Determined to support his mother and brother, El Chapo, along with a few cousins, took matters into their own hands. They decided to cultivate their own marijuana plantation. But fate had a different plan for El Chapo. His father, for reasons unknown, expelled him from their home, thrusting him into the treacherous world of narcotics. El Chapo found himself working for the Guadalajara cartel, overseeing their drug shipments. What set him apart was his zero-tolerance policy for mistakes. If a shipment was delayed or encountered any issues, El Chapo would personally execute the sicario responsible. This ruthless approach caught the attention of Felix Gallardo, one of Mexico's most influential drug lords at the time. After Gallardo's arrest, El Chapo saw an opportunity. Back in 1989, after taking over some of his former boss' territory, El Chapo decided to start his own cartel called Sinaloa. Little did he know, this would eventually make him one of Mexico's most feared and influential drug traffickers, catching the attention of the Drug Enforcement Agency and Federal Bureau of Investigation in the early 1990s. During that time, the Colombian drug cartels like Medellin and Cali were losing their grip on power. And guess who stepped in to fill the void? That's right, Sinaloa and Guzman himself. Under his leadership, Sinaloa took control of the cocaine trade, stretching all the way from South America to the United States. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Sinaloa became known for its clever smuggling methods. They built a network of air-conditioned tunnels that snaked beneath the Mexican-United States border, allowing them to transport drugs discreetly. And get this, they even hid cocaine inside fire extinguishers and cans labeled as chili peppers. The impact of Guzman's operations didn't go unnoticed. Art Bielik, the executive vice president of the Chicago Crime Commission, compared Guzman to the infamous Al Capone. He said, "What Al Capone was to beer and whiskey during Prohibition, Guzman is to narcotics." And he didn't stop there. Bielik emphasized that Guzman posed an even greater threat than Capone ever did, with more power and financial resources than Capone could have ever imagined. But it wasn't just cocaine that Sinaloa dabbled in. They also trafficked heroin, marijuana, and methamphetamine, spreading their influence not only in the U.S., but across 5 continents. Their reach expanded to become the largest drug operation in the entire world. What made El Chapo truly remarkable was his innovation. He pioneered the use of underground tunnels to transport a significant portion of his illicit goods. As his empire grew, so did his notoriety. He became the most wanted man in Mexico. Although he was captured twice before, El Chapo managed to slip through the prison walls, making him one of the most notorious prison escapees. However, fate finally caught up with him. In 2016, after his 3rd arrest, El Chapo was extradited to the United States. Now, he resides in the impenetrable walls of the ADX Florence, serving multiple life sentences and never seeing the outside world. On February 12, 2019, after a lengthy trial that involved over 200 hours of testimony from 56 witnesses, El Chapo faced the verdict. He was found guilty on all 10 counts against him. These charges included serious offenses like engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise, conspiracy to launder narcotics proceeds, and the use of firearms. The evidence presented in court was compelling, and the jury made their decision based on the facts and testimonies presented. Fast forward to July 17, 2019, when Judge Kogan delivered the sentence. It was a moment that would change El Chapo's life forever. The judge pronounced a sentence of life in prison plus an additional 30 years. That's a significant punishment, ensuring that El Chapo would spend the rest of his days behind bars. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.